In 1943, a Milwaukee engine maker named Robert McCulloch had never built a chainsaw. By 1948, he'd built one of the most famous ones in America. By 1999, that company was bankrupt, and today it isn't even American-owned. Here's how it happened, and why almost nobody noticed. Robert Paxton McCulloch wasn't a chainsaw guy, he was an engine guy. In 1943, he founded McCulloch Motors Corporation in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, building small two-stroke gasoline engines for industrial use. 2 years later, he moved the entire operation out to Los Angeles, chasing the post-war boom in aerospace and manufacturing talent. Then in 1948, McCulloch did something that had nothing to do with his original plan. He introduced the company's first chainsaw, the Model 549. It weighed over 25 pounds. It took 2 hands and a strong back to run. And it looked and sounded like a piece of surplus wartime machinery, because in almost every practical sense it was one. McCulloch had taken the same small engine expertise that powered generators and pumps and pointed it at cutting down trees. Loggers who'd spent years swinging axes and 2-man cross-cut saws suddenly had a 1-man machine that could do the job in a fraction of the time. It was heavy, loud, and imperfect, but it worked well enough to put McCulloch's name on the map almost overnight. Here's the part almost nobody remembers. McCulloch was never just a chainsaw company. In the 1950s, the same engineers who built chainsaw motors were also building small target drone engines for the U.S. military, the kind used to train anti-aircraft gunners. Through a side venture called Paxton Automotive, McCulloch also engineered superchargers, using forced induction technology to squeeze more horsepower out of ordinary engines. Those exact superchargers ended up bolted onto the 1957 Studebaker Golden Hawk and the Ford Thunderbird, 2 of the most iconic performance cars of the decade. Think about that for a second. This was a company that saw a 2-man chainsaw engine, a military target drone engine, and a muscle car supercharger as 3 branches of the exact same tree. McCulloch wasn't building one product. It was building small combustion engines for almost anything that needed power, and the chainsaw was just the version that stuck. This next fact sounds made up. It isn't. In 1964, McCulloch founded an entire town in the Arizona desert to house its growing workforce, Lake Havasu City. That alone would be a strange footnote for a chainsaw company. But Robert McCulloch didn't stop there. In 1968, he attended a London auction and bought the actual London Bridge, the real 130-year-old granite structure being sold off because it was slowly sinking into the Thames. McCulloch had it dismantled, shipped stone by stone across the Atlantic, and rebuilt over a man-made canal in the middle of his new Arizona town. It opened to the public in 1971, and it's still standing there today, thousands of miles from the river it was built to cross. A chainsaw company built an American city from scratch, then imported a piece of British history into the middle of the desert to anchor it. At its peak, this wasn't just a manufacturer. It was a small empire with its own zip code. By the mid-1970s, McCulloch had expanded well beyond saws. Hedge trimmers, leaf blowers, a full lawn and garden lineup sold in hardware stores across the country. At its peak in the mid-1970s, McCulloch chainsaws sat on hardware store shelves in nearly every state, right alongside the hedge trimmers and leaf blowers the company now made under the same name. Then, on October 4th, 1974, Black & Decker bought the company outright. 10 years later, in November 1984, Black & Decker turned around and sold McCulloch again, this time to a private ownership group. McCulloch kept building saws through all of it. The logo stayed on the box. The name stayed on the shelf. But the ground underneath the brand had already started to shift. Ownership by ownership, and almost nobody buying a chainsaw at their local hardware store had any idea it was happening. In January 1999, McCulloch Motors filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and what happened next is the part of the story that almost never gets told. Its European division was sold off to a rising Swedish competitor, Husqvarna. Its North American business was picked up separately by a Taiwanese manufacturer, Gen Feng Industrial. In 2003, an Ohio-based company, MTD Products, signed a deal to become the exclusive manufacturer of McCulloch-branded products across North America. Then, in March 2008, Husqvarna came back and acquired the rest of Gen Feng's outdoor power division, finally reuniting the McCulloch name under a single owner, decades after it had first been split apart. Today, McCulloch is simply a brand sitting inside the Husqvarna group, on shelves right next to the very competitor it once tried to outcompete. Same name, completely different company. So what actually killed McCulloch? It wasn't one villain. It wasn't a single bad decision or one buyout that sank the ship. It was 5 decades of different owners, each one stripping something away, a division here, a factory there, a piece of independence, until the name outlived the company that had originally built it. That's a very different story than the one we usually tell about corporate collapse. There was no dramatic scandal, no single Wall Street villain. Just slow erosion, ownership change after ownership change, until McCulloch stopped being a company and became just a label on someone else's product. This pattern isn't unique to chainsaws. Look closely at almost any brand that feels like it's always been there, on a hardware store shelf, and you'll usually find the same quiet history. A founder who built something distinctive, a series of corporate parents who kept the name because customers already trusted it, and a slow drift away from whatever made the original company special in the first place. McCulloch just happens to be one of the strangest versions of that story, because so few people ever built a city and imported a bridge along the way. The next time you see a McCulloch chainsaw at a hardware store, you're looking at the ghost of a company that once built Target drone engines, superchargers for Ford Thunderbirds, an entire Arizona city, and imported a British landmark into the desert, all now reduced to a name on a box, owned by a Swedish conglomerate. That's not really a decline. That's what happens when a brand outlives its own company. So here's what I want to know. If a 130-year-old bridge and an entire city couldn't save McCulloch's independence, is any brand ever really safe from disappearing into a bigger company? Tell me your answer in the comments, and subscribe if you want to see which brand disappears next.